I think this is one of the really difficult and very sad situations, because in almost all of these cases, the reason you have these invasive species is because what humans have done. In most cases, they've been imported through commercial trade, which now is so global. And this is one of the huge downsides of globalization and free trade, is that you are bringing species that can live in relative harmony or equilibrium in one habitat, whereas when they come to another one, they don't. And in some sense, such a species, well, you could put it in Catholic casuistry by thinking that an invasive species is, in one sense, attacking other species, and the principle of self-defense, or the defense of, on behalf of those other species that are going to be destroyed by this particular species, justifies one in killing them. In the same way, it might be very tragic if a human being under some terrible mental illness or other situation in which they have no control over will kill you unless you defend yourself and ward them off, which often may involve their death, although we can never intend the person's death. And so there is, I think, an analogy. I actually haven't thought about it this way before, but I think there is an analogy in that principle of legitimate self-defense being applied to ecosystems. Although, you know, in some sense, it's very unfortunate, because it's not like that particular species, again, got there on its own, or at least in the vast majority of cases, or we can attribute any wrongdoing to the species. Like, how did it come to be that that particular species is invasive? You know, like, you know, a coyote taking a sheep on some grazing land. I mean, if human beings have taken over much of the habitat of these species, in a lot of cases, it's not giving them much of an option in terms of finding food for their own survival. And I think so often these situations arrive because of human taking over, destruction of habitat, etc. I mean, you know, if you live in a city, if suddenly they tear down a house, you know, 3 doors down, you can bet, you know, in a couple of months, all the mice that might have been living hidden in the foundations of that house are going to be moving into the houses next to them, and they'll see an uptick in them. You know, it's like when their habitat is destroyed, they have to go somewhere else. I think to the extent possible, certainly with bees, which we have a huge need for, and because of various human activities, their populations are declining precipitously, which, even if we don't care about the bees, is terrible for all kinds of agriculture and cross-pollination and so forth. I think, again, that principle of self-defense could apply in some cases. I think when possible, you should simply try to move the creatures to somewhere where they're not disruptive, rather than simply killing them when that's possible. And I think also recognition, you know, that if we are taking over and destroying their habitat, we do have some responsibility to try to make sure they still have alternative habitats, or they have alternative means of survival and flourishing, without simply seeing them as pests. Because of course, pests just means that they're inconvenient to us. Nothing, there's no species per se that is a pest. Or a weed would be the equivalent in the plant world. That's simply a term for saying they're doing things that we don't like or that are inconvenient to us in this particular context. For one person's weed may be another person's beautiful plant, one person's pest may be another person's pet, or et cetera, et cetera.